Very good. Well, we're talking TV history as we celebrate our 75th anniversary this year. We're one of two stations in this market to do that. I know we were talking before before we started rolling. You've been here 30 years almost.
Almost in the Dayton market for almost 30 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry I touched my mic.
Oh no, you're okay. That's not a question I care about. But it's to set up this. How have you seen this market grow and change in your 3 decades here?
It's been kind of interesting. There's been quite an evolution within those 30 years. I think TV newscasts, when I first arrived in this market, were a really, really big deal. There are so many different choices now with streaming and so many other things, and the internet, that people are consuming news product in a lot of different ways. So I think that's been one of the biggest things I've seen over the years. And a lot of people coming and going from this market as well.
Sure. When you talk about, so many more options, it's not just channels, it's also technology. When this medium started, it was still pictures being shown, or maybe they're playing records just to fill time. And now, just completely different, just in what we're sitting here doing right now in a studio with a green screen behind us and all of that. So, this medium of local television, the technology has just really so vastly changed over the years.
It was really a different beast when the station went on the air in 1949. At that time, you basically had 2 choices for television production. It was either a live production, or it might have been a film or a movie that they were showing, and there wasn't much else. Graphics were pretty much non-existent or extremely ancient, and using art cards and things like that. So that's been a really big change, I think. One of the bigger things that happened throughout the early 50s into the mid 50s then was, of course, they developed kinescopes, so they could at least film live productions for archiving and playing back later. And then, of course, finally videotape was invented in the mid 50s, and that changed the industry quite a bit.
Yeah, well, you think of, you used to have to cut film up.
Right.
Some of the first things I learned at Ohio University when I went there was, and that was for the radio side, but was cut and tape, or the old carts that you had to decost or stuff like that. And now it's all digital production. So just the way in which we do what we do has so vastly changed.
That's correct. And even at one time, you had to physically cut videotape and then try to splice it together and see what you could come up with. So there's been a lot of changes technically over the years that I think have affected the industry in a wonderful way.
Yeah, you talk about a hard edit.
Oh yeah.
You're using razor blades to cut that stuff up. That's or the X-Acto knives back then.
Right. And when I first got into the industry, I can remember we had old 2-inch quad videotape that were in these huge machines. I mean, absolutely enormous. And to edit with them, you had to press play on one unit and record on the other unit. And I was working with an editor at that time who was rather short in stature, and he could barely reach the 2 buttons to press them simultaneously like this. And of course, then we got into much more sophisticated types of editing with videotape, and then the advent in the digital has just changed everything.
Yeah, that leads me to a question I was going to ask you about. Now everything is done digitally or with nonlinear editing. The days of putting a tape in the machine, those are gone. Those machines don't even exist anymore, basically, or they're museum pieces. So how do you feel like that has impacted, now on the local TV side, news is what we produce. There was a time at DTN, back when it was WLWD, that we were producing live shows like Midwest Hayride
right.
and things like
That's
that.
right.
Now it's just news. But, in your mind, how has that digital evolution with the internet and with nonlinear and all that impacted the way broadcast news is brought to people's homes every night?
I think one of the big things is, and I think back when I first started teaching here at UD in 2001, I was still teaching tape-to-tape editing, and I was teaching nonlinear as well. There was some benefit to learning how to edit on tape-to-tape because you're still telling stories, and linear editing is one clip after another telling that story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think we lost a little bit at first with that ability to tell the story and think ahead when people started editing exclusively on nonlinear formats. So I think that was rather interesting at the time. And I continued to teach tape to tape probably until about 2007, 2008.
Yeah, that's
both of
about the time. The first nonlinear we got in Ohio, and this isn't a question, this is just an aside, was an Avid. And it was, you had like black cables that you had to plug in from one portal to another to get
That's
the
correct.
stuff to work computer-wise. Now that seems ludicrous now, but that was, they were just starting to teach that when I graduated in '99, and we're like, how does this even work? This is the crazy technology but now it's a SIM card that's
Right.
this big and it plugs into the side of a laptop computer and you go.
Right, and when I was working at Think TV, we installed our first nonlinear system, I believe, about 1997, 98. It was an ancient system. It was called Lightworks. And if you wanted to delete a clip or something, I'll never forget this, you had like a scroll wheel, and this shark would come up very slowly across the screen and eat the clip and then very slowly go back. And you really weren't saving a lot of time over linear editing at that point in time and storage was just minuscule at that time as well.
And transfer times for files. I remember when we started that ability in the field, how slow that was. Because internet capability was just not meeting the technology at that time. Now you can do stuff really fast if you're in a good area. But back then, it was to send a minute and a half thing would be 25 minutes long if you're lucky.
Right, right.
And now it's, sometimes you can do that in just a minute or two. Like I mentioned, what we produce now is TV news.
Correct.
The other programs have fallen by the wayside, or we're getting those from other options. But why do you think it's local TV news that caught on as the touchstone for people, where folks knew who their weather and news people were and their sports folks, and became a part of, you felt like you knew a Brian Davis or a Mark Allen. Why do you think that became kind of the touchstone for people, the local news elements at the affiliate level?
I think it's human nature that you want to have information about your environment, and that means your home, your town, your locality. And television news made it easy for people to consume what was going on in their area, which made it absolutely begin to boom through the 60s, 70s, into the 80s. So I think that was the big thing, and people connect with those people who are on the air. They think of them as friends. They think of them as somebody that they'd want to come into their home, and that's a special thing, and that still continues to this day.
Yeah, and when you talk about being somebody who reaches that level, if you go all the way back to the start of TV in this market, there was a Ruth Lyons or somebody like
Correct.
that who really was I spoke with somebody the other day who used the term icon for somebody like her. But we've had people in this market over the decades who have connected that way, and some of them have worked at Channel 2. So what have you seen? You talk to not only students, but you've lived in this community for decades. When you talk to people about television, what do they say to you about the people that they do want to welcome into their home?
It's kind of interesting because WDTN was WLWD, which essentially was part of the family that was WLW in Cincinnati, where the Ruth Lyons show originated at that time, and Bob Braun. And so there was that local level. Kind of miss that sometimes. Those types of shows that aren't produced at a local level, those have gone away, but they were so wonderfully popular, and I think that played into the whole thing with television news as well, that we have these people that are our friends and doing a variety type of show, and then, here are their news people, and they're going to be our friends as well. In the Dayton market, particularly with WDTN, you got to think about Phil Donahue and what happened with him and going national, and to think it started right here in Dayton, Ohio, is really amazing.
Yeah. Donahue is an interesting character. You watch some of those early local before he went to Chicago and became heavily nationally syndicated. Those early shows, like he had Johnny Carson here.
Right.
You know, Johnny Carson sat in Dayton, Ohio, and did the Phil Donahue show. That seems impossible to think about now that we get a Jimmy Kimmel or a Stephen Colbert to sit down and be part of a local broadcast. But
Oh, it would never happen.
No,
Never
but
happen
Donahue could get
nowadays.
whoever he wanted back
That's
then,
right. It was a big deal. And even when he was in Dayton, you mentioned Johnny Carson, there were other big names that came to Dayton to be on the Donahue show. That's why he ended up where he was.
Yeah. I think this wasn't Donahue, but it was Ruth Lyons. I think she got Bob Hope.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she had Bob Hope on the show. But those people could get the national big stars of the time, maybe not big movie stars, but your TV stars, that you could get them to come to Dayton or in between to that Cincinnati area. It was a, you know, can you harken back to that time a little bit
Yeah.
when there was a lot more of an opportunity to feel accessible to somebody like a Bob Hope or a Carson that you would never see now?
Well, one of the things that Dayton had going for it is in the summer they had a summer stock theater in Dayton called the Kenley Players, which was extremely popular in the 1960s and into the 1970s. And they would get the biggest television stars to star on these productions. I think they were mainly at Memorial Hall. And when they'd be in Dayton to do their plays, they'd stop at Channel 2, of course, for the variety show or whatever it might be, to make an appearance there. And I mean, the biggest stars in television from that period always came through Dayton every summer.
I didn't know about the summer stuff.
Yeah, that's something you need to take a look at because
That's neat.
that was a big deal.
And that feels like a lost piece of Dayton history that most people don't have any.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I was born in '76, so I didn't just beyond that, but that's not something I had ever heard of before. So that's neat. I'd have to check that out. I'm looking to see if I had anything else. We covered a lot of ground. You've been great. Go. Yeah, jump in, please, as I look through my notes.
You mentioned all these old shows, these variety ideas, these ideas of
Talk
big-
shows, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think broadcast locally needs to return to any of those older ideas?
That's an interesting question because, as you know, your audience isn't as big as it used to be at the local level. And what do you do to get those people back? Maybe it is something like that. Maybe it's thinking about programs like that or content that's not news and what you can do. What you're doing with Living Dayton is kind of a little bit like that right now. So, but maybe it's time to rethink and see if it works. We have nationally syndicated talk shows that every station in the country picks up and buys, but maybe it's time to think, hey, can we do this at a local level, make it cost effective and sell it.
Yeah, a lot of judge shows now. There's
yes.
so many judge shows now. Where do you see this industry going as we move forward? Because, you know, with streaming and everything else, there are so many draws for eyeballs that you're right. The days of a 30 share, those are for everybody. Those are gone.
For sure.
And, you know, where would you like to see it go? Where do you think realistically it will go?
You touched on one thing. There are so many different choices right now, and I think everything is going to continue to get fragmented. Having said that, though, you look at some of the streaming services, not all of them are doing that well financially, and some of those may end up going away, and maybe we're going to have a concentration again where people are going to come back to local newscast and what's happening in their community as a way to connect. And of course, being able to pick up your phone and look at a local TV newscast on it is going to be extremely important going forward. Yeah. Which is why you have to have your newscasts live again, but that's a next star issue.
Yes, that's not that was not one we enjoyed when they said I mean, I guess I get it, but we were sad when they made us stop doing that. So if there's severe weather, we stream them live.
Yep.
But that's the only time. I think that's all I have. Did you have anything else?
I guess my last question actually had to do with the whole idea of live casting. Do you think there should be a return to some more live casting or on-scene casting? We do those occasional full shows live in the field. Do you think that's something that
I think it's something every local TV station should be doing with their newscast and any other local content that they're producing. They should try to get it live, going out live that way. I think there's a certain sense of immediacy with that people appreciate and viewers appreciate. And it comes down to dollars and cents, of course, and will somebody buy that? I think they might.
Technical feasibility too comes into play. But yeah, that's you know, but in my last market, we once a month we would take our noon show on the road and do it from wherever the community was we chose, and the show would be built around that city for that day.
Yep.
And so people seem to enjoy that.
Yeah, well, going live is easier than it's ever been.
Yeah.
We've got a truck we roll out with students to do games for ESPN Plus. So,
Yeah, I know you do a lot of the, especially for the women's side.
yeah, we do women's soccer, volleyball, softball, baseball, men's soccer.
Yeah, there's so many more options to do the
Yep.
broadcast stuff than there was when I was going through it. And I was sports focused
Yep.
originally when I came through, and we'd have if we would have had then what there is now, we'd have lost our mind.
Yeah.
So it'd have been something. So
Yep.